Thanks, Amy. I'm particularly privileged to hear that we're the only one. May there be many more as a result of your funding contribution. So my presentation's got a slightly different spin on it. It's one very much focused about the community and Castlemaine, for those of you who have no idea where it is. Some might, but eventually you'll all find out due course, because it's a great place. It's about an hour out of Melbourne, northwest of Melbourne, on the way to Bendigo. It's a very alive, sort of active community. And I've only been there about 5 years, but we bought a little farm as well because we want to do all this sort of stuff on our farm. My presentation is going to be less about the specific technology, and you'll see why. There's been some terrific presentations that preceded me that go into a lot of technology detail, and we're certainly harnessing a lot of that thinking, and there's new thinking there that will accommodate as well as we go through this. But just briefly, the region had a very active group of people focused on clean energy, and however this particular image here is to show that it ain't that easy. If you don't bring the community with you, you can expend a lot of energy, you can divide the community, create a lot of ill will, and you get nowhere. So that sort of social licence to operate is absolutely critical. And we actually found that the people who preceded my time there were trying to put wind farms, all volunteers doing a terrific job, but the community, like wind generally in Australia, it's a very hot topic, and it tends to polarise the debate and the community. So we sort of moved on from that, and we said, well, if you're keen on sustainability and renewable energy, and if you're genuine about that, then you'll engage with us in other areas, and they said absolutely. And I think in a small community, people don't want to upset their neighbour because, you know, you've got to live with them, you've got to live with each other, and that's the reality of it. So we did a bit of stakeholder mapping for the community to find out who's who, what the interests were, and so on. So that's a critical part for any of these community type projects. And I should say that we all live in communities, and some of them might be in big cities. It's a bit similar, but certainly regional communities, there's thousands of them across Australia, and we're hoping that what we can do can be replicated by others in their own way, but the principles are transferable. And in the same way that we've borrowed ideas and learnings from what we've seen overseas, particularly Northern Europe. So we came up with a vision, because unless you've got a vision, you're not quite sure what you're aiming for. But if you've got a really strong, powerful vision, people get drawn towards it, and everything we do is actually adjusted or calibrated in terms of meeting that vision. So you can see the points up there, which is, you know, very much about a strong community participation, ownership, creating jobs, and really building a legacy in the region. And the bottom line, zero net emissions by 2025, was something that's galvanised our attention. And of course, as soon as we did that, Adelaide said they're going to do it by 2030, the state of South Australia are going to do it by 2050, Victoria said they're going to do it by 2040. So we like to think that we were just a bit ahead of the curve there. But however, you know, we're at a crossroad, and so we had to ask ourselves a question: what exactly do we want to do? Why do we want to do it? When, how, and who? So all those sort of questions have to be worked through. It's just not like someone comes to you as a consulting engagement and says, well, we want you to do this, here's the scope, give us a quote, and if you win, good luck, off you go. Far more factors than that to consider, and just as important. So here's an equation that those of you mathematically minded and engineers, in fact, in earlier presentations, the right-hand side of the equation I didn't put up, I'd leave it right to the end. So you're there sort of scratching your head going, what the hell does that mean? You probably still are. So B plus C equals E. So it's basically the blue economy plus the circular economy is our foundation for zero net emissions. I don't think I've ever seen that equation done by anyone before, but anyway, it motivates us. I think we all know that linear economy is very wasteful. It's not going to work. It's actually creating huge problems for the planet. We've got to move into the more circular way of thinking, and we had some early presentations on that today. The blue economy is an inspiration, particularly for regional communities, whereby the underpinning philosophy of blue economy is that we actually are surrounded by abundance. So we should be using what is readily available, what nature gives us, and it's cheap and efficient. So as soon as we sort of see things through that paradigm, we see all sorts of other opportunities emerging, and that's led to a study we did, and part of the community, this is the one where we had a problem with the wind people. So we said, okay, we'll take wind off the diagram, although we snuck a micro version up there. We took the super big one off. and we did this natural asset mapping, which is like doing a mass balance, but a whole at a regional level or sub-regional level. And then we translated it into this infogram, and you can see there that the amount of power that can come out of the little local reservoir might power 400 homes, or there's enough canola for biofuel that'll power so many cars, and so on. So simple little pictures with a number that people can relate to tends to capture their imagination, and they start to see that, hey, the area that we live in actually is more than just roads and paddocks. It actually can provide energy security for us and renewable energy. So not forgetting for a moment that Australia and most other countries around the world have signed on to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is not just about greenhouse emissions, it's about communities, it's about the environment, and it's of course what we call the built environment, the natural environment and the social environment. So you can frame that in the way of natural capital, built capital and human capital. And typically what we do, and as an engineer we're trained to focus more on some of those areas than the others, and certainly accountants generally have no idea how to account for the natural capital or human capital, and they make decisions, and we all do it, that trade off those bottom two. And we can't afford to do that. So the challenge for us is how can we actually develop a project that elevates all of those together without the trade-offs, because the trade-offs just lead to further problems. They become externalities, and eventually we pay for them, or through our health or through some other way. So some of the building blocks to consider, both on the supply side and the demand side, are listed there, and that's part of the juggling exercise when building this sort of project. Once again, it's a nice picture. It sort of gives an idea of, well, this jigsaw puzzle, you've got to fit these things together. They're all conversations to be had. There's technology behind it, and there's a myriad of requirements to consider as we integrate those thoughts, those opportunities and ideas into solutions. I forgot that actually had a spin on it, but there we go. That's about the extent of my PowerPoint skills, by the way. So the next opportunity is, well, how do we actually represent this in a way that we can share this with people? So you can see the circular economy at work there, and I don't know how well you can see that back in the room, but essentially you've got the energy sources at the top, you've got the energy, the consumption, not sources, but the consumers at the bottom, and then you've got the converters on the left-hand side. How do you take the energy source, convert it into something that's usable, use it, and then what goes back into the system. So it's a closed-loop model, except for here where you've got the grid to perhaps supplement the power, and we're always going to need that, but the challenge is how can we do that that preserves our natural asset and is economically feasible. And we, just for a bit of fun, we produced this diagram. It's now been published in a few journals and government guidelines and things, coincidentally, because it wasn't the intention. But we actually had a community awareness night in the Castlemaine Town Hall. We had a band, we had good food, and that was the placemat that everybody got on the table. On the flip side was the infogram that we asked questions for. So there's one way to try and draw them in, the infographic. So you can see there it is. So you get a sense that, and how important just the community involvement is, and it's no coincidence that I think ARENA sees that as being important too, because without that it's a technology solution, and technology solutions often fail because you don't get those other components taken care of, as we saw this win. So the next thing we did is thought, well, we'd actually better go and capture some real data here to see whether it's going to work or not. So we did a pre-feasibility study, and we looked at all the numbers, went back to the different parties, and I'll explain who some of those parties are in a moment, to see what was available. You know, what sort of materials did we have? How energy intense is that material? What's the calorific value of it? What's the frequency of it? What's the cost? What's the availability? What's the gate fees? All the sorts of parameters that you've seen other presenters talk about. And that was only with publicly available information. Now, interestingly, when you go and talk to the companies and engage with them, they tell you all sorts of things that we didn't know about, simply because it's confidential information. But we built their trust by that stage, and they could see that potentially not only was it a good social story for the community, because actually, believe it or not, they all draw their employees from the area anyway, so that's important to them. They want to be seen as good local citizens. And if they can actually make money on the way through, and if it becomes a compelling business case, the rest are just bonuses. So with that zero net emissions, the 2025 goal, one of our team, just in his spare time, thought, well, how would this look? How would it stack up? And Castlemaine and the Shire has got probably the highest penetration of solar PV in Victoria now. And so we probably can't do much more than that. We can put a solar farm in, we're looking at doing that as well. But we knew we had these waste streams and thought, well, how significant is that? Maybe there's some wind in there, we'll sneak it in along the way. And once you do those, you look at energy efficiency, maybe some biofuels of some sort, there's still a gap till you get to the 20 megawatts, which we project is what the community needs. And the way we actually bridge that gap and way beyond is through soil carbon. So there's a picture up on the right-hand side there that shows you, just because it's nothing more than an image, but it'll give you hopefully a pretty stark message as to how important the soil is. On the right-hand side, it's been overgrazed, it's compacted, there's no water in there, the soil's lifeless. On the left-hand side, that's where they've used regenerative farming techniques. It's a live, active soil. That is drawing down carbon. The others, the carbon's been oxidised. So that's a lot of the CO2 in the atmosphere has actually come from the soil. Way more than all the power stations and fossil fuels burnt forever. And we tend to forget that. So there's a little equation down the bottom that says, if you've got a 100 kilowatt solar array, which I'd love to have on my roof, of course, but you need a very big roof space, you can actually do the equivalent with 10 hectares of soil, 10 hectares of CO2 in the soil. So some of the metrics that we gathered, you can see there, is that we looked at the different waste streams, the sewer waste stream, and we have about 20 megalitres from the local sewage plant, which is Colaban water. We've got some landfill gas, which is already there. We thought, well, we've got green woody waste, we've got domestic waste, and most importantly, we've got the Don Smallgood factory, which is the largest in the southern hemisphere. So we're very fortunate, and we think, well, if we don't harness that, then it's a missed opportunity both for them and for the community. Again, here's some numbers. These are publicly available numbers, so nothing secret here, and that's some of these figures up here where it says fats, oil and greases. They'll be revised now that we've actually, it's almost like the auditor comes in and has a real look at the books to see what's going on. But they're bigger numbers than that now, which is really good. So we looked at the source of it, location of it, the weekly amount, and some commentary around it. But it's a bit like a high-level mud map of what actually is available in the community. More closely, if you look at the Don Smallgood factory, when you look, because basically what they do is they used to be an abattoir, a pig abattoir to produce pork. They bring it pretty much extensively all in from Denmark now, wrapped in plastic. And they process it and we eat it here, and we don't know that, but that's what they do. And they employ 1,600 people. It's the largest of, as I said, in the Southern Hemisphere, it's the largest plant that they have in the world. And George Weston Foods, everyone knows that name in Australia, I'm sure. So you can see at this level here, the waste streams go through a DAF process. There's heat treatment as well, and then it gets split into the various streams. And some of it is it's a liquefied stream which goes to the Colaban wastewater treatment plant. Then there's landfill, there's deep burial because there's got aqueous issues with quarantine and so on, and plastic. And there's even actually some tallow that gets sent off supposedly for biofuels. So we've got numbers against those now, we've got quantities, and if we look at waste per month, it's roughly 400 tonnes of solid, 36 megalitres of trade waste, and another 100 megalitres of sewer. So that's what we got to work with. And if we need more, then we go further afield. We go to Harcourt, which is a very well-established fruit growing area with apples and pears, or we go down to Kyneton, there's an abattoir down there. But initially we're just focusing on an area. But we don't actually know whether we've got a bankable business case. So the purpose of what we're doing right now is to develop or undertake a detailed feasibility study, which is where the arena supporters come in. The state government in Victoria is providing complementary support to do some other things around the edges there. And this image really is there for people who, perhaps not this audience necessarily, because you've all got a pretty good idea of the integration opportunities for these sorts of plants. Particularly our last speaker showed just how elegant all this stuff can work together. But in a community, people have no idea of this, and they're amazed that you can actually take that waste stream and turn it into gas and turn it into energy. And then they're amazed that what comes out of that can be a sludge stream, which can be a compost. You can turn it into a compost, which can go back into the local paddocks. Or you can take some of the biomass, take the, the heat out of the biomass, and produce biochar, which goes back into the local community. So it can all stay local, and you can extract the value at different levels along the way. And I saw this just the other day. I thought I'd slip it in, but it's really just a case that, you know, and it's a report that's essentially said that, you know, hybrid bioenergy systems are not the way of the future, but it's what we should be considering right from the outset. Because no one solution fits all. It actually comes back to that, well, I think the blue economy thinking that as well, and the circular economy. What have we got there? What's the inherent value of it? How can we harness? How can we use it? And the feasibility study will tell us just how effective each of those is, the waste streams. In fact, they're not even waste streams. I like calling them waste streams. So the next question is, well, where would we locate this? There's 2 precincts in Castlemaine. One's on the southern end, which is called Precinct 1. And so on the left, you can see landfill. And they've got green waste. They've got their gas, landfill gas. Then you've got the wastewater treatment plant, and next to it, you've got a foundry. So we've got the opportunity to do, have a, across the fence power purchase agreement with the foundry, which circumvents the grid completely. And basically, it's behind the grid solution. So that's a picture of the northern side of the town, Precinct 2, which happens to be where Don's Smallgood is. There's a pipe that goes to 2 kilometres that takes the trade waste at the moment down to the wastewater treatment plant. There's also a hospital there, and there's another foundry. So there's potentially another precinct in that area. And so who are the stakeholders? There's a few of them. So we've, as per any good community project where you've got to identify who the major players are, get them on side, and that can take you 12 months, can take you longer, but as long as it takes, that's what it is. So we have Colaban Water that look after the water in the region, and they are super excited about this for their own reasons, because this will actually, they've got a limit by the Victorian government to cap their emissions, and they can't spend any more capital. So this is actually a good commercial pathway for them potentially. Then you've got Don's, you've got ARENA with government funding, you've got some complementary funding from the Victorian government to look at other aspects that Don's need. Then you've got some philanthropic funding here for some terrific people who seem to exist in this country who provide funding for community-type projects. And, you know, I'm amazed at just how much generosity there exists in the private sector for these sorts of things. It's extraordinary. And then we've got PowerCore, because PowerCore, we're going to have to use their grid. And as soon as they found out about this project, instead of being blocking, now that you're seeing this road to Damascus conversion occur with a lot of the power companies, and they want to be part of it. So just to finish up, sure there are risks, and we have to be very mindful of that, and that's part of what we're taking on board in the feasibility study. There's the quality of the material, the calorific value of the material, the volume, the reliability of supply. I think we've heard other speakers talk about how important that is. Community support, the council finally has come on board. Notice I hadn't mentioned the council up until now because they're quite recalcitrant. That CEO's gone, there's a new one, there's a whole breath of fresh air, and they're all excited now. So we're lucky after banging your head against the wall for some years. It has to be commercially viable. The technical design, in a way, is probably the least of our considerations because, you know, the wheel's been invented. It's just a matter of figuring out what's most suitable for the combination, the integration of resource streams that we want to harness. And then, of course, it's not going to fly unless we have rock-solid offtake agreements with the different parties. So there's a range of technologies here, and there's some examples, and I'm very pleased to include that soil carbon component because it's not part of the normal conversation that people have. It's not part of their awareness to how powerful that is. And in terms of, if we recognise that the sunlight gives us per square metre 1 watt of energy per second, where does that go? It just doesn't disappear, it doesn't bounce off. It actually gets captured by nature's solar panels, which are the leaves of plants, particularly pastures, and that if we've got a healthy soil, that acts as a carbon pump, and that's how you get carbon into the soil, and that's how we've had it there for years. And we've got the capacity to raise the percentage of carbon in our soil from the average of where it is now, which is below 1%, up to about 4%. And that's an extraordinary number for a whole heap of other reasons. But so it is very much a part of this community regional solution. So in closing, where are we at now? Well, we've just launched or started the this full feasibility study, which will have a bankable business case coming out. It will identify investors once we know the scale of it. It is possible that the technology party, which you've just chosen, they might come back and say, sorry, it's not going to work, or it won't work in the way you want, it'll work differently. From a business case point of view, we fully expect that we'll need a combination of debt and equity financing, and that's where CEFCs and so on will come into this. Maybe ARENA and private financing. We've got a legal model that's already structured, we've had in place that allows community ownership of these types of projects, meaning that Colaban Water would want some ownership, Don Smallgood would want some ownership, private individuals might, and so that's the structure's in place, which is great. And hopefully next year we'll see the beginning of the building of this facility. So some of the learnings from our perspective anyway, and I think they probably are relatively universally applicable, and that's start with a great vision that inspires people, be clear about what it is, engage the community at all levels, because that brings other people with it. Identify the best people locally, and you'd be amazed who is living in a region under a rock somewhere, you know, that have got skills. I mean, it's just blown our mind, the skill levels that are there. Be patient, persistent, and have fun along the way. So that's really our story. We're only at the beginning of it, but yeah, maybe this time next year we'll have a different story to tell. Thank you. Yeah, please, yeah. I mean, has anyone seen this, done this before? I don't know, but we're open to ideas as well. I mean, we're not precious about it.
I'm just curious about the council involvement. You said they were pretty recalcitrant until near the end, or further down the track.
Yeah, that's being very polite, actually.
Sure. Do you know any, like, you said the CEO moved on, or what sort of prompted them to get involved in the process?
Well, the council staff people were always keen. The councillors were keen, but you know, there's a certain culture that comes with the administration of any council, or any organisation for that matter. And so, you know, that's been relaxed somewhat, and people now actually feel a lot less constrained and a lot more willing to participate. So it's been fantastic by comparison, to be honest. It's nothing structurally in the organisation, it's just a different breath of fresh air coming in there. And they've now set themselves a goal also of zero net emissions 2025. So that's a sign of something, isn't it? Yes?
How's the size of the community operation and the size, and also find a little bit more about the ownership model?
Okay, so the size is, in the town, there's just under 10,000 people, and in the Shire, which is in close proximity, there's probably another 5,000 or 6,000. And there's more as you go out, and it's a very rapidly growing community because it's only an hour, 10 minutes on the train from Melbourne. So, you know, that has pluses and minuses, of course. So, does that answer the question about the size? Yep. But you've got nearby, you've got Kyneton, you've got Harcourt, you've got the other places which within 30 minutes, essentially. You've got Bendigo up the road within 30 minutes. So, you know, there's a particular demographic, which is, every region has its own version of that. The ownership model, we got pro bono legal advice. So if you find a friendly law firm and they all try and do a little bit of this just to be good corporate citizens, and actually some of the lawyers in those firms actually love doing this work. It's not just about making money to buy a new holiday house or something, all right? But they like doing something they feel is worthwhile and meaningful. So we work with them to come up with a model that that would work for the Mount Alexander Sustainability Group, which is driving this. So it would work at the level whereby It could accommodate private investors. It could accommodate debt equity funding. It could be structured in a way so that we can do multiple projects. And essentially, we've set up a unit trusts mechanism. And there are other wonderful examples of community funding, community projects, starting with solar and so on around Australia. And I think Marina's probably had something to do with some of those, or other governments have anyway, that are really pushing the boundaries. And you see it in Northern Europe with Denmark and those countries doing some pretty exciting things. So how do you have it so that, for example, community members can buy $1,000 a share in an organisation like the Hepburn Community Wind Farm? Or how do you have it someone who wants to come in and put $20,000 or someone who puts $1 million? So it's about inclusivity, but it's got to work. So we've got a legal structure. We haven't tested out there, but we think it's pretty bulletproof. So we'll find out, hopefully. Any more questions? All good? Thank you for listening.